Hello, and welcome to this T-Level Tactics video for the T-Level Digital Support Services course, where we're looking at our second topic of stakeholders for R1.1 business context. Now, in this video, we're going to take a look at what stakeholders are and create a definition for what that means. We're going to identify different types of stakeholders and how they can influence organizations in different ways. And we'll also analyze stakeholders in a bit of a case study business and the impact that stakeholders can have on IT. Now, before we get started, just a bit of a disclaimer. First of all, these videos are not endorsed or sponsored by any education institution or qualification awarding body. T-Level Tactics videos should not be used as a replacement to any classroom learning you might be receiving, as we think that discussion and practical activities with your peers and your lecturer will help to expand your thinking and comprehension. Instead, these materials are best used as preparation material before a lesson or revision material afterwards to reinforce learning. Also to note, these videos cover the same content for R1.1 of the T-Level Digital Business Services course. However, they're going to be more contextualized towards IT support roles. Okay, let's get started then. So what is a stakeholder? Well, if you were to Google it, you'll probably get Wikipedia as the first result, and Wikipedia says that a stakeholder is a member of groups without whose support the organization would cease to exist. Okay, and doesn't give us a whole lot of information. What if we were to look elsewhere? Well, if you were to look at the T-Level Digital Support Services coursebook that I mentioned in the introductory video, you'll find a definition in there that says that a stakeholder is someone who has an interest in the business and who can either affect or be affected by the business's operation and performance. Okay, so a stakeholder is an individual, group, or an entity that has a vested interest or concern in the activities, decisions, and outcomes of a business, organization, project, or initiative. God, that's a lot of words. So stakeholders can be internal or external to an organization, and they might have varying levels of influence and impact on the entity. Stakeholders' interests often need to be considered and managed to ensure the organization's success and sustainability. Okay, so a short look at what a stakeholder is. If you're a Patreon member, this would be a great time to download the task sheet from Patreon and to have a go at the first task. Really short task this time, no more than 5 minutes to spend on that, and then come back here and move on. Pause the video here, have a go at the first task, come back, and we'll get on with the second part. Okay, so what kinds of stakeholders are there? Well, based on our definition, first of all, I want you to think of a business or organization, perhaps one you've identified in the previous video. Have a think about who can affect that organization, and who does that organization affect? Let's look at a scenario. So in our scenario, I've come up with Anne's Cakes and Cafe. They're a small independent store in the village of Burcliffe that has a population of about 1,500 people, so quite a small village. Let's take a look. So Anne's Cakes and Cafe, I've identified a number of stakeholders that might be involved. First of all, we'll have Anne, who's the owner and operator of Anne's Cakes and Cafe. Anne has an investment partner. Obviously, her store will have some customers. Also in the village, we've got a local hotel who might buy some cakes off of Anne to have in their own restaurant. Anne has a pastry chef who helps make the cakes and come up with different ideas. The local government and also the national government are a stakeholder. Anne will have suppliers for various different ingredients and things that she might want to sell. She also has a barista to serve coffee in the cafe. The local community of the village are one of her stakeholders. The local coffee chain that has a store just down the road can be considered a stakeholder. And also a local restaurant are a stakeholder as well. Now, why? Why are all of these people stakeholders? Surely a coffee chain that has lots of stores across the country can't be involved in Anne's Cakes and Cafe. And the local restaurant, well, what's that got to do with a cafe? Well, let's take a look. Not all organisations are going to be affected by the same types of stakeholders. Most will be affected by similar types. Stakeholders can be split into internal and external stakeholders, and you might have a bit of an idea of who they might be based on that scenario. The first stakeholder we're going to take a look at are owners and partners. These are considered internal stakeholders to the organisation, and they'll maintain overall control of the business and its direction. There could be multiple owners depending on the business structure, and they'll directly influence the business. The success of the business will impact the profits the owners and partners receive in return. Some businesses may have a board of directors. They're usually found in large businesses such as LTDs and PLCs. And if you've watched the previous video, you'll know what they mean. The board of directors is comprised of internal high-level staff such as executives and majority shareholders. They can often include high-profile external stakeholders as well, depending on the type of organisation. And each member of the board of directors can vote to influence different business decisions, such as the aims and goals of the organisation, budgets, hiring, and any dividends paid out. What about employees? Well, employees are also internal stakeholders. They're hired by the business or the organisation, and they'll have an employment contract with that organisation. Success of the organisation can directly affect employees' job security, pay, and working conditions as well. Employees can have a limited ability to directly affect the organisation other than the amount of effort they put into their work or their refusal to work if they decide to go on strike. Now, customers might be an obvious one. They're an external stakeholder for the organisation. Customers are going to benefit from the organisation, in this case, having access to a village cafe. They're going to be a source of income for the organisation, for some, their main source. But customers to an organisation can include other businesses as well. So in our scenario, this could be the local hotel or restaurant who may purchase cakes from Anne's Cafe in order to sell in their own businesses. Organisations will have an impact on people who aren't customers as well. They can have a wider impact on their local community. Again, an external stakeholder. Even if you're not a customer, even if you don't regularly interact with the organisation, it can still have an impact. So for instance, the opening of a large warehouse depot may not directly affect local businesses or residents, but the increase of industrial and business traffic on roads nearby will still impact the local area. Remember, residents and businesses can make appeals to local government that can directly impact an organisation's operations. For instance, they could refuse or they could protest about the opening of a large warehouse, and that could potentially stop or delay that from opening. Suppliers are another external stakeholder. These are going to be people, businesses, organisations that supply goods to the organisation. And they could be people who supply technology, stationery, food and produce, and they're going to be stakeholders who will most likely make a profit from any sales to the organisation. The cost of these goods from suppliers can directly impact operating costs of the business or organisation. Local competitors are another external stakeholder. You can have direct competitors who are going to be local businesses in the same industry. So for our scenario, this could be the national coffee chain nearby. And you can also have indirect competitors who are local businesses that will offer similar services but of a different kind. So in our scenario, this could be the local restaurant. Now, why are these considered stakeholders? Well, direct competitors obviously could potentially draw customers away from Anne's Cakes and Cafe to them. Perhaps they're cheaper, or perhaps they offer different products or different offers. And indirect competitors, well, in this case, it could be that the restaurant decides to suddenly start making their own desserts and pastries, and perhaps Anne's Cakes and Cafe will need to come up with some new ideas. Financiers are another external stakeholder. This could be banks, for instance, who will provide loans to businesses for expansion and growth. And if they're offering funding and finance to a business, they're going to have an interest in the success of that business in order to receive their money back, with some interest, of course. Government is another external stakeholder. We mentioned earlier that you can have local government, which will approve and reject applications such as planning applications to open a business or to change something about it. Local governments can also support startup businesses, and they'll always look to meet the needs of the local community. On the other hand, we've got national government, and this is going to have a different type of influence. They're going to influence tax and legislation. They could provide grants to influence industry in different parts of the country. And overall, they're going to want organisations to succeed, as this means that there's increased employment and increased production of goods and services. Now that just about covers all of the stakeholders that we need to look at, and here's a quick summary of those different types of stakeholders. We've got internal stakeholders, that includes owners and partners, a board of directors, and employees of an organisation. And then those external stakeholders, of which there's a few more. We've got customers, the local community, suppliers, competitors, financiers, and the government as well. So let's take another look at Anne's Cakes and Cafe. We can organise the stakeholders for Anne's Cakes and Cafe a little bit better now that we know a bit more about stakeholders. We can split them into internal and external stakeholders. Now, based on what we had before, we can start with the internal stakeholders, and we know that Anne and her investment partner are quite clearly internal stakeholders of the business. We know that the pastry chef is also going to be an internal stakeholder because they'll be an employee, and the same with the coffee baristas as well. The external stakeholders for Anne's Cakes and Cafe are going to be suppliers, the customers, the local community in the village, the local hotel and coffee chain that we identified, as well as the local restaurant, and also the government at both the local and national levels. Okay, this would be a good time if you're a Patreon member to go back to the task sheet and have a look at task 2 on stakeholder impact. It's not too big, it'll take you roughly about 20 minutes. Try not to spend any more time than that, and then come back to the video to look at the last part. Have a go at task 2, pause the video here, and come back when you're ready. Okay, so what kind of impact can these stakeholders have on a business? And more importantly, what's their impact on IT and digital technologies? Well, we know that stakeholders are important to an organisation, and we know that they can both directly and indirectly impact them. How exactly will they impact the use of IT? Let's take a look at internal stakeholders first of all. Owners and partners control overall direction of IT usage and the budget allocated, and their personal familiarity with technology may affect their willingness to embrace new tech. For instance, if we think of AI, there'll be some people who have known about it for a long time and are really passionate about embracing it, including it in all of their products and services. But people who've only just heard of AI and what it's doing might be a bit more worried about, well, how can we include it and what will it do? I'm not too sure about it yet. The board of directors similarly will have that personal level of familiarity with technology and their own ideas about it, but the board of directors can do something different. Remember, they have votes that they can use to affect change in the organisation. And if there's a number of directors who like something or don't like something, that will directly affect the outcome of that vote. Also, in larger organisations, you may have directors that are biased towards specific brands. For instance, you may have a director that really likes Dell laptops, but someone else who has had a good experience with HP before. and they may want to take things in a different direction. Employees will also affect the technology that's implemented in an organization. It depends on what's required of their job roles. What's industry standard for that role in terms of hardware and software that people are using in different businesses and other places they may have worked before? And employees will also have an opinion about what might affect their current work. And if new technology, well, they may have to learn it and get used to it before it really improves their productivity. A part of this is going to be the training required by employees to do so. Employees' willingness to embrace technology is going to directly affect their productivity, and you may have somebody who really doesn't want to get used to AI and is going to outright refuse to use it, instead sticking to methods they already know. What about external stakeholders? How can they impact our ability to implement digital technologies? Let's look at customers. How do customers want to interact with the business? We've seen this change drastically over the last 10 years, with social media usage and platforms now being a mainstay of how customers interact with businesses, whether that be through messaging, whether it be engaging through social media posts or tweets, for instance. And customers' willingness to accept change is going to play a part of this as well. We've seen this through the pandemic, where more and more restaurants and cafes started using apps to allow customers to order directly from their table. Some customers will really enjoy this, embrace it, and want to use it and expect it everywhere, whereas other customers may not like this change. They may not want to use technology. They may find it more difficult and want someone to come to their table to take their order instead. The local community will have an impact on technology, sometimes indirectly. So, for instance, the internet connection available in the local area. Is it reliable? Does it have a good bandwidth? Is it going to be suitable for what we want to do in our organisation? What about access for underprivileged groups as well, those who are low income or elderly? Are they going to be able to access this technology in order to interact with our business? Suppliers will also have an influence on what we can implement. For instance, is the technology we're using compatible with supplier systems? Are suppliers able to supply industry standard technologies to us? If the technology we want isn't available from a supplier, we may have to look elsewhere. Our competitors are also going to influence what technology we may wish to use. It could be that we're trying to keep up with trends. Maybe we've gotten ahead of the game and a local competitor has now seen what we're doing and trying to copy it. Perhaps it's the other way around. Perhaps we're behind the times. We need to spend a bit of money in order to keep up with the latest standards and technology. Competitors are also going to be looking, how can they stand out amongst the crowd? How can they differentiate themselves from you? Perhaps use technology in a way that you haven't thought of. Finances are going to play an influence here, again with compatible systems. If the accounting software you're using isn't compatible with software that your bank uses, perhaps, this could cause an issue. We may have to use a specific product. And also, their ability to fund technology upgrades or changes. If you're making a business case for a business loan, for instance, if the bank or the financer doesn't think that's appropriate, they may not grant you the money you need. And in terms of local government, there'll be certain requirements that you need to meet in order to do specific things. So for instance, filing a tax return, for instance, you'll need to use a government website, and that website may be incompatible with certain web browsers. This is a small example, but it's something that's really important because you could be penalised if you don't do it correctly. There'll also be laws and legislation at a national level that impact how and what technology you can use. For example, there'll be certain cybersecurity and GDPR requirements that you'll need to look at and make sure you're abiding by. There's more about GDPR later in the course, and specifically in the legislation unit. So all stakeholders impact and can be impacted by the IT used in an organisation. And organisations will be trying to strike a balance between keeping up with technology to please stakeholders, but also not getting too far ahead that they're leaving other stakeholders behind. They'll be trying to please everybody. So that's a bit of a look through how stakeholders can impact what technology we implement, and a good time to take a look at task 3 on the task sheet if you're a Patreon member. So head back to the task sheet, have a look at task 3, which focuses on the impact of IT in organizations, and spend roughly 30 to 45 minutes on it. Pause the video here, have a go at the task, come back, we'll summarize, and I've got an exam question for you in a moment. Okay, so in this video, we've taken a look at what stakeholders are, the different types of stakeholders, and how they can influence and impact organizations. You should now be ready for an exam-style question. Let's take a look. Businesses have a range of different internal stakeholders. Name 3 different internal stakeholders, briefly describe how each stakeholder you've named could influence the way a digital business operates. There's 3 marks available here, so it shouldn't take you too long to write the answer out. Spend no more than 3 to 4 minutes and make sure you name 3 stakeholders and make a point about each one about how they could influence a business. Now in the next video, we'll be looking at business environments. That'll be our 3rd topic. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you click that button to be notified when that video comes out. And if you haven't signed up to the Patreon, have a look over there. You'll be able to get access to our task sheets, and there are more benefits for members as well. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.